the last will be the first. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We can open the general discussion. Please, brief questions and brief replies, because we have not too much time.
Well, thank you so much, particularly to the faith leaders, for these inspiring insights. I want to push back in light of them against the idea about communication as a simple, repetitive gesture. And I don't think it's just a quibble. I think it's actually a very important consideration as we think about how to communicate climate change. Obviously, what we learned just now is that message needs to be tweaked to audience, and it has to comport with principle. But I would go even further to say that the message needs to resonate with people's lives. So a message that's clear and simple and repetitive might be sufficient for a one-off decision like a vote. But to create the kind of transformative change that the governor was talking about requires that the idea be embedded and embraced as a part of one's life. And we've learned this in the human rights community. It's one thing to promote human rights as a kind of catechism that you teach top down to people, but until they understand what each human right means in their own context and can embrace them as a part of their life, human rights doesn't make a difference on the ground. And I would argue that it's the same with climate change. People need to understand it and embrace it as a way of living and not just a message that they're hearing. So, just a comment.
Thank you very much. Out of fear of a colloquy, I just have a few comments because I have several mixed emotions. I very much enjoy the presentation from our evangelical friends. To the Reverend Hescox, you make a very correct point, which is right on point. Climate change is not a progressive issue, by no stretch of the imagination. I think those who have been most vocal in policies that have been manifested have been primarily by left of center on the political spectrum. But you are right, it is not a progressive issue, it's a humanity issue, which means those right of center as well should be at the table. They should always be at the table. And the coal mining example, which I respect very much, and I validate very much that if you are a coal miner, your father was a coal miner, your father's father was a coal miner, and you have no other way of earning income to put a roof over your child's head, to put food on the table, clothes on their backs, and it's the fear of change. What does change mean? Because it impacts your livelihood and it threatens your livelihood. I agree 100%, and whatever industry may be, whether it's coal mining, whether it's the steel industry, whether globalization, whatever it may be. I do believe strongly that politicians, as well as business leaders, as well as faith leaders who have serviced these constituencies, wherever they may be, in New Mexico, in Western Kentucky, in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, they have a responsibility to understand the consumption of coal, which is diminishing domestically as well as internationally, how to take a community and provide them the needed policies that uplifts communities. So I understand and respect very much so the position of the coal miners, because they are good people, regardless of where they are in the political spectrum. But the last point I want to make is the following, is that it is absolutely critical that the evangelical community be at the table. No doubt about it. And you're right, one of the statistics you pointed out was folks left of center, folks right of center are wired differently, and they have different viewpoints. There's no way I'm going to be able to change or persuade you on a whole variety of issues that you have bedrock values and beliefs, and vice versa. So I have to respect you, and hopefully that respect will be reciprocal at the same time. But I do believe strongly that we're in a very critical age in our history, that we cannot, and I'm not saying you, by no stretch of imagination, indirectly or passively validate the deep-rooted racism, the nationalism that's tearing out the fabric of our great nation. And the issue of climate change is also part of that issue too, because it impacts those who are evangelical, Christians, Catholics, atheists, none of the above. So it is a human issue that is critical. So first and foremost, it's about responsibility and accountability for all individuals across the political spectrum, left or right and center as well, to come to the table and to deal with this issue, as opposed to say, we want the conditions to be ripe and prepared for us so we're allowed to enter a safe zone, if you will. There's always going to be a healthy exchange back and forth. I think that's part of democracy. But I do thank you for coming to the table and for attempting to persuade your colleagues or your friends on the Hill. Measurement of success will be manifested, obviously, through policies that recognize the issue of climate change.
Let me respond to your question first and on the messaging. You're right. There are 4 keys, and I've made literally thousands of presentations in thousands of churches in 9 years. And we've developed a very successful model. The first message that warms people's heart up is health, because they will not listen to you till they have a reason to act. The second message is the one that Leith eloquently did. The second response is that people need to see the scriptures that call them their rooted values. The third thing in our evangelical community is individual action. What can you do? What can I do myself to be part of it, not just big government? And number 3 is the message of hope, how it's changing, how we're doing it. To address your questions, I think, and I'll tell you a story that Governor Brown was actually there at. He wasn't there for this question. But I was invited to attend the CEOs of the Green Group meeting this spring, their retreat. And their paid mediator, when we started the discussion, opened the whole meeting up by saying, what can we do more to bring more progressives to understand climate change? And I raised my hand up and said, I am not a progressive, and you will never get the vote unless you change your mind. There has been a tendency throughout this debate about climate change to see it as a progressive value. And it is not a progressive value. I completely agree with you. But unfortunately, those who have been the biggest spokesmen for climate change have been more progressive, which has led to part of the alienation. I work very strongly. I can tell you, just for instance, a couple years ago, I gave a presentation on climate change to the Evangelical Hispanic Pastors Association of Miami-Dade County. 85 Hispanic pastors signed a Bible. The next day, I delivered to their governor, Scott, who was a climate denier. So, I fully am cognizant of the justice issues involved in climate change. What I'm trying to do is to be very practical, is to break this quagmire, to break this siloization, is to find the ways that we can move communities up together. And that's the whole purpose and pragmatism of what I do and what we do together and centered in the scripture. But what we need people like you to do and the representative to do is to tell some of the other folks that, look, we do have those other issues that we're going to disagree upon. I can go to that representative's office and pray, and we're good friends. I can go to probably the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate, and we just pray together. Because we recognize that we have different values, but we have the same value in climate change, and we get along fine. And that's what I'm asking for, is that we need to create space that different communities can come to address this problem from their value sets, with their key values, and then we'll eventually come together and separate the other issues that we're never going to agree upon.
Thank you very much. Please, underline.
Thank you. So we're talking today about solutions and being more positive. We're going to lose a champion of Governor Brown when he steps down, unless he's going to consider to be the next president. That's going to be a positive thing. But I want to talk about the climate issue as a unifying force rather than a problem. I think we have to forget about the terms in the values and focus on the issue that brings together and unifies. I gave an example yesterday about the situation in the Middle East and the water scarcity. There is one well and two communities. Either there's going to be a fight where everyone is going to try and get that water, what is left of it, or they work together in a unifying force. This is actually a historic moment for humanity where whether one is secular, believing in evolution, or believing in faith, or whether Democrats or Republican or whatever, no one can disagree that we need this planet to live on it. So I think we should focus on that rather than on the differences and aspects. And the Muslims are really an asset in that. If we use the premise of the Quran, maybe I'm the only one who will, in this room, subscribe to, but if that message is saying there's an anthropogenic origin for climate change, one has to respect the issue regardless of the source. And I think that could be a unifying and a different way of looking at communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Virgilio, each one have 3 minutes.
Well, I'd like to pick up on a point that Jerry mentioned, the strategy to deal with complexity, trying to come up with priorities, right? So maybe our faith leaders can inspire us to set priorities in a different way. We have to set priorities which are politically and tactically very smart. So Ed here mentioned that from a communication standpoint, the message has to be very simple. And the faith colleagues, Mitchell, Alistair, and Leith, all said that the message has to relate to the values of the various religions and faiths. So I like very much the concept of creation care. Very simple. I think that meets Ed's criteria of being very simple. And Jeremy, could we look at that as a strategy from your perspective to guide priority and say, well, creation care is good for your health. Simple as that. And that is a way of linking health to air pollution and climate change. So that could maybe make up a story and a strategy for us to move from discourse to action.
Monsignor, may I interject one thing real quickly for that comment? Is just so you know that we just published something called Healthy Creation Equals Healthy Children, and it's exactly to do that point, and I would love to give it to a copy of the medical folks in this room to critique and add to it as we republish it, because it's exactly the way of bringing more and more young families on board. Thank you.
May I just...
One moment.
That's excellent. And this is already happening, especially among younger adults, particularly in the evangelical community. I also want to say that evangelicals often are tilted toward action. So let's talk about water. The number one provider of clean water in the world is World Vision, which is an evangelical relief agency which provides fresh, clean water every 10 seconds to somebody who's new that needs it. So, you know, it's doing it. It's not just talking about it.
I forgot, please, Franklin. Brief, please.
Thank you very much, Monsignor. This has been a morning of discussion about calls to action, and it's been extraordinarily rich. So I have a question for many of the speakers about something that can undermine action, and that is despair. I'll observe that over the last couple of days, as we've heard presentations about scientific data, much of which is grim, people have often commented, well, that was depressing, and then there's a little titter of laughter, and then we move on to discussion. There was a comment yesterday that those who know the data best are the most worried. So I'd like to ask the leaders, thinkers, activists who are in the room, how do we make our own efforts sustainable on a personal level by staving off despair? Is faith a tool? Bishop Redford, you mentioned finding common ground. Is it the joy of fellowship with those we work with? Is it being blessed with a constitutionally optimistic personality to the point of delusionality like I've got? How do we stave off despair so that we can do this work for the long run and lead and inspire others to do this work?
Marcello, brief, please. Brief.
Thank you, Bishop Redfern, for your inspiring words. And I have to mention that in Middle English, of course, inspiring means divine guidance. It also is breeding. Therein lies the fundamental. It was Pascal who reminded us that the heart knows of reason for which reason has no reason. So this artificial Cartesian binary opposition between science and the faith ways of knowing the world, I think are rather limiting and get more on the way than help solve our problems.
It's your turn.
I want to address this issue which Howard mentioned. I'm always told, oh, don't take your bad message, you'll paralyze people. We give the bad message, we give the solutions, but I want to tell you, this tendency to downplay it has caused another paralysis. Paris Agreement, while it's probably the best policy document, is not going to do much for climate change. From now to 2030, Paris allows the emissions to increase by 7 to 10%. And the countries, it's only intended, nothing is mandated. In that sense, Kyoto was much better. And as science says, we put in our document, and Schellenhuber's, amongst the scientists working this problem, we know if all that happens from now to 2030 is Paris, we are going down that existential threat. I'm not taking this message to the public, I'm taking this message to the experts here. So we have to be educated. And every time Governor Brown goes abroad, meets world leaders, he always tells me, Ram, they're not getting this message. They're thinking Paris is going to solve the problem. So nobody's doing much. So I do advise my communication leaders here, sure, we don't want to paralyze the public, but you have a responsibility to take the urgency to the leaders. And so I just wanted to make that point. And I'd like to ask Reverend Leith Anderson, who visited my lab about 2 months ago. And I had lined up 10 experts to preach to him. He preached to us about climate change because I trusted the media and said all evangelicals are denying science. So we don't want to sugarcoat it too much. I would like Reverend Redfern and Leith Anderson to address this. How do we go with this message of gloom and doom without paralyzing? I'm not talking about the public. I'm talking about the leaders.
Please.
We've heard, I think, how health, putting health at the heart of this, can bring people together from different faiths, different perspectives. And we've also talked about how health has become disconnected from its environmental roots. Essentially, it's viewed as a biomedical issue rather than an issue of sustainability of the human environment and the common home that we share together. And I suppose my final reflection of this meeting is that perhaps some sort of overarching concept which can bring us together to sustain this human population together with the natural systems on which we all depend, might be this concept of planetary health, which tries to integrate natural systems with human survival and human health in this new geological epoch, the Anthropocene epoch. And perhaps we can come together and crystallize around an overarching concept of that kind, which implies reverence for human life, but also reverence for nature.
Please, the last one.
Just to, Andy, on that, I think the challenge is when we talk about something as big as something called planetary health, we have to bring it back into people's lives. And I think that is the connection, is connecting something very big, but connecting something with people's lives.
I think that maybe, sorry, but we need to finish because we have the question of state. But a conclusion of this general discussion, maybe we can give the floor to the governor to say something.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, I don't think we should worry about despair. We ought to worry if we're not on the edge of despair, because it is despairing. I mean, ending the world, ending all mammalian life, this is bad stuff. It doesn't get any worse, other than somebody pressing the nuclear button and wiping it out even quicker. So we do have big threats, and the big threats come from the big power. And the big power comes from progress, modernity. We got all this power now. We have to get some kind of wisdom to deal with it properly. So I think despair is really just a tendency you either have or you don't. There's nothing that I see out there that gives me any ground for optimism. But I'm extremely excited about doing something about it. Now you figure that out. So when you're on the edge of a cliff, you got to think clearly about getting off the edge, and we're on the edge. Okay, so that's the point about, and I do think as I go around and listen to world leaders and to politicians, the surveys reflect the way it is. A majority of people are not worried. They're not thinking about it. Climate change is not a big issue for most people. That's what needs to be changed. And that gets changed by all the things that people talked about. And probably the most exciting possibility here is if the progressives could talk to the conservatives. If the secular humanists and what I would call the pagans and the atheists, all those people would sit around the same room with the evangelicals who they rather despise probably. So we have, and maybe vice versa. So if we could actually be in a room where people have such fundamental differences but could still respect each other as human beings and say, okay, we're going to have a disagreement here on abortion. We may have a disagreement about gay marriage. Even to talk about that in California, you get into trouble with Democrats and liberals. But then we got these other things like climate change, like the danger of a nuclear exchange, and those things are serious enough that we ought to be able to talk about that as we bracket some of the other issues. I think that's true, and I do think if the evangelicals could sit and listen to some of the progressives, and if the progressives could take a deep breath and listen to the evangelicals, I think that would be the most powerful step forward that I can imagine. And I think that is very difficult. And I'd like to invite some evangelical leaders to come to our UN-sponsored climate summit in San Francisco, if you ever would step into San Francisco, because that's like coming to, in some people's minds, Sodom and Gomorrah. But we need at least one just man, if we can't find 10, to transform the program. So anyway, we're going to have a climate conference. We're going to have a lot of leaders, state leaders, provincial leaders, NGO leaders, mayors, corporate leaders, and certainly there ought to be some evangelicals. And at that time, we ought to create some dialogue. And dialogue dialogue is a very difficult discipline. And in fact, if you read, one of the individuals who got dialogue going, Martin Buber, in the 20s, he wrote his book, I, Thou. And that's a difficult book itself to read. But as I understand that book and that idea of dialogue, you're meeting, you're going to meet someone who's different than you are. In order to meet that person, you have to be open to what that person says. And that is very difficult because it sounds like you're betraying your fundamental beliefs. So can we be present to, can we meet other people whose premises are contradictory to our own? And through that way, we can make progress. And so I will have to quote one more Jesuit, Teilhard de Chardin, who said that everything that rises converges. So if we can raise our consciousness or raise our focus or awareness, and we do that together, there can be a convergence. It won't be 100% convergence because there's too many separate experiences and beliefs. But whatever you think about these, what we call hot button issues in the political world, we can't deny the fact that destroying the planet is bad stuff. Air pollution and toxins hurting children and hurting the poor people, that's bad stuff. And we got evangelicals presenting fresh water, all over the world. Great. So we got some common pathways, but I wouldn't underestimate the hostility at the political level between progressives and conservatives. And that's when it is getting worse. So we're going to need some good conveners and some fora where we can talk in a way that we don't feel we're betraying our premises or our friends and colleagues when we talk with those who are very different from ourselves. So I think this is a very exciting idea and possibility to bring more conservative people together with some more liberal people. So that's all I got to say. And I think that the problem is big. You should despair, but that won't help. So be optimistic and do whatever you can.
Ram, it's your turn about this statement, final statement.
So it's a great honor to chair the last session of this meeting. And what a spectacular day this morning, hearing from the global leaders and faith leaders. I think you all enlightened all of us on both the cross-dimensional and the multidimensional aspects of the problem. And thank you very much to our global leaders and faith leaders. So, Governor Brown, you made a big issue of societal transformation, and we listened to you, so we are organizing a lunch meeting today. Unfortunately, the table won't accommodate everyone of the following to take up that idea and discuss that. So we'd like to invite you, our Congressman Scott Peters, Senator De Leon, with Reverend Leith Anderson, and Reverend Redfern, and Reverend Mitch Hescox, along with the Pontifical, Academy members, our President, Joachim von Braun, of course, our Chancellor Marcello, myself, Partha Dasgupta, Professor Yuan Lee, and Professor Peter Raven. So, in a separate table. And I assure you, everything done here is transparent. We are not meeting any secret caves. We will take a summary, and I'll send it to all of you, what we discussed. So let's move on to the session. I think what we would like to do is first I've requested my co-organizer, Sir Partha Dasgupta, take 5 minutes to summarize this meeting and tell us how to go forward. He was about to complain to me 5 minutes is too short. I remind everyone, in a similar meeting we organized 2014, I was given 2 minutes to summarize to Pope Francis of the entire meeting. So I'm giving you 3 times more time, Partha. And then I'll present the declaration. We'll have a brief discussion, and then I would like Chancellor Marcelo Serrando to give us his view of what are the next steps, and then the meeting will be closed by our president. Partha,
Is it on?
It's on.
Right,
Yes.
right. Thank you very much. I think it would be easiest to summarize this 2-day meeting, 2.5-day meeting, which has been the declaration which we've been provided with, gives an account of it. I think it'll be best to summarize it by noting, first of all, that this is in fact the 3rd joint meeting of the 2 academies that started in 2014. We had a second one earlier this year, and this is a 3rd. And this series arose out of a tension which has permeated this discussion these 2.5 days, which is that we're simultaneously living at the best of times and the worst of times. We've never had it so good. On average, we live longer, we're better educated, better fed. 1980, something like 40% of the world's population were in deep poverty by the World Bank standard. 2015, it was just around about 10%. So this is significant progress. And yet, a great deal of work was suggesting that perhaps we were building on borrowed times. We were mining the biosphere. And this series of conferences, bringing together both social and natural scientists, is really a reflection of that tension. The first one that we had in 2014, that Professor Ramanathan and I, with our Chancellor's blessings and advice, organized, was called Sustainable Humanity, Sustainable Nature, Our Responsibility. And it was asking the question, if there is this tension, how has it come about? Why is it that we haven't been, what's the process? What are the institutional mechanisms that have led to this disconnection between the 2 forces? And that first series of papers was designed to study that. The Vatican published it, and I don't know if there are a sufficient number of copies available for distribution now, but I'm sure if you ask for it, it'll be sent to you. The second, which is currently in process of publication, that Dr. Raven and I helped to organize earlier this year, was on biological extinctions. And the idea there was to look at some of the long-term consequences of this mismatch that I began with, to do with species extinctions at a rate that is unprecedented for the past 65 million years. This is irreversible, and that's the real danger mark. And the conclusion of the meeting was that it's not that long-term either, because the rate at which the species are being extinguished can have huge consequences to our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, never mind the distant future. This meeting has taken a shorter-term perspective, and this is because this is something that is very doable. One way of summarizing it is to say, or capturing it, is to say that we are looking at non-communicable health risks, which are at the same time correlated. And that's the difference. And the correlation is what has caused so much of the concerns at this meeting. The fact that it's no longer your own activity which is endangering your health, but others simultaneously are endangering yours, and your own action is endangering others. And that seems to me to have been the most significant set of worries expressed by the medical profession, the health experts and the scientific and the epidemiologists. We are ended now with the worry that maybe there's just too much despair. As I said, this is the best of times as well as the worst of times. And I think that's the right way to look at it. I can't imagine that the young would be filled with despair. They have huge communication channels available to them, and they exploit it all the time. And one of the thoughts that a number of us have expressed during this meeting is to reach out to the young. This is an unparalleled group. I don't need to re-emphasize that it's not just scientists here and social scientists here, but faith leaders and political leaders. If it is possible to communicate the fact that there is huge agreement on the dilemma that humanity currently faces over matters that require collective action, that's the correlated risk I mentioned. If this message is sent through Twitter, I guess, is that the mode of operation, or Facebook, I think these things have a multiplier effect. It's a start, and I think we should exploit that. I want to end by thanking our Chancellor for the encouragement he's given us right through this process. It is quite remarkable that the Catholic Church, of all, when I say remarkable, I don't mean because it's the Catholic Church, it's remarkable that there is a church which houses two very significant scientific academies who are there not just to elect other people, but actually to carry out scientific research and communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Partha. And you also stuck to your time. Thank you. On the Twitter issue, the Academy has received a message from Leonardo DiCaprio. I think they were curious why we left them out from this meeting. And it looks like they'll be willing to tweet. You know that I don't know anything about tweeting. Apparently their followers are 15 million. So we're going to send this declaration to them and tweet. And Pope Francis has a huge tweet followers, and Marcelo has translated this, and we're going to send the final version to him. And I have a specific request to our Governor Brown. He has a big megaphone, and he's going to COP23. I hope on behalf of the group, if we can inform them about the meeting, the major outcomes. So let's move on to the declaration. We distributed this to you. It's changed quite a bit from the version we sent to all of you 3-4 days ago. Thanks to Jeremy Farrar, the troublemaker, we tried to take the 5 pages into 2 pages. And you all, after distributed, I got 50 comments of additional bullets, and I just took 2 or 3 of them. So let me, can you project on the screen, please? I think I can advance that. Yes. The things we have changed, we have put in track changes with blue font. The opening page, the opening paragraph, Partha already talked about this, so I'm not going to go over that. And this. The track changes didn't come through as blue. Oh, okay. Then let me just, yeah. I think the one we added is climate change is driving the largest forced displacement of human beings in recorded history. A human health catastrophe, climate change and environmental degradation also add to human misery by stoking violence and mass migration. So that was added, it's not in your version. By the way, I need to say we met for 3 hours last night. Jeff Sachs did his miracle on this document. So he's not here. I'm hoping he's listening to the streaming. So Jeff, thank you. So this part is the same, right? The climate change caused by fossil fuels, we haven't changed that. And climate is closely interlinked because of, let me see. Yeah, I'm a little bit, since the track changes are not there, let me focus to just the main things. I see. No problem. So the one we added is an integrated plan to drastically reduce pollution and climate change essential. That's a new statement. And then the other one was given by WHO. Regions that have reduced air pollution have achieved marked reductions of disease burdens. So we want to tell them a positive message. It has worked. So the first part is same. Now I'm going to all the bullets. Nothing has changed here. Yeah, the climate justice issue brought up more clearly the poorest of the planet who are still relying on 19th century technologies to meet basic needs such as cooking, or bearing a heavy front of the damages caused by the economic activities of the rich. The rest of the sentence is there, so I'm not going to read that. But we added the sentence, I think it may be there. We don't want to say that everything is only suffered by the poor. So we added the sentence, yet the poor are not the only ones to suffer. The rich too are bearing heavy costs of increased flooding, megastorms, extreme droughts, major forest fires, and extreme heat waves. Air pollution and climate change strikes down the rich and poor alike. Okay? So then the declaration of the solutions. The first one is the same, we numbered it. And then the second was added by WHO, call on health practitioners to educate and advocate for climate mitigation. The third is the same. The fourth is also the same, just talk about decarbonization, short-lived climate pollutants, etc. The sixth point is same, electrifying the global vehicle fleet and other downstream use of fossil fuels. It put numbers. No, that's there. We just put the numbers. Yeah. This is the point I take responsibility for not bringing out clearly. The solution to the climate change problem, decarbonization, you just convert all the end users to electricity, or heating, you're this and you're that, and generate that electricity through renewables, and you want to store that electricity, store it in batteries or hydrogen, and then burn the hydrogen. So that's what the sixth one is saying. The seventh one, end tropical deforestation and restore degraded lands, is already there. This one, ensure that polluters bear the responsibility and financial cost to assist the poor and vulnerable. There was a sentence there which I deleted, with the polluters pay. And we had some discussions, so I took it out for that. So that was in your document, I took it out. This one we added, carbon price, item 9. When assessing the social cost of carbon for purposes of regulating and taxing fossil fuels, this is new. No, it's not. Yeah. So what we are saying here is that it turns out if you take all of the statistics Maria gave us about deaths, and Partha talked about the statistical value of life, if you include the cost of air pollution from fossil fuel, the social cost of carbon would go from $30 to something like $100+. So bringing in the health is a powerful stick for the pricing of carbon. The 10th item was there, none of them are numbered. And the 11th, the 11th was added. Again, all of you health folks, your 25 emails were reduced to 2 sentences, so let me read it to you. Undertake preventive health actions vis-a-vis air pollution and climate change, including inform the public of the high health risks of air pollution and climate change. And then the 12th was added by John Schellenhuber, medical science and climate research must join forces now to create a powerful alliance for sustainability. The 13th was also added by the physicians here, promote behavioral changes beneficial for human health and protective of the environment, such as increased consumption of plant-based diets. We are requesting all of you to follow what the Pontifical Academy of Science does. Don't serve meat on Fridays. Yeah, educate and empower the young, to our Dean Marcello put, educate and empower the young to become the rising leaders of sustainable development. My own phrase would have been million climate warriors, but that's too combative, so this is worked. And the 15th was already there. I think, I just want to share my view and then give the podium for your feedback. I think the two new things in this document, written by, where natural scientists participated, I think it's the first, well, maybe the first document, which says climate change is an existential threat. And of course, I've heard Governor Brown, several leaders talk about this, but here, when we use the word existential threat, it's based on the data which have come in the last 4 years. The tropical forest going extinct, 7 billion people exposed to deadly heat. So all of the data was reviewed for us to come to this conclusion. It's an existential threat. And the second is the last point. I think Governor Brown said it more powerfully. We might change it, that we need technical solutions are there. By themselves, they are not adequate. We need societal transformation. And we think that can be brought about because of the moral, ethical issue. If you can bring in faith leaders and healthcare providers, you talk to the public, you ask them to change behavior. So if you can team up with us on this, so that's, I think of the existential threat and number 15 as the new thing in this declaration. The rest of them, others have said. Thank you. So we don't have too much time for comments. What I want to tell you, the procedure. The first page is there. Yeah. We want to post a declaration on the Pontifical Academy of Science website. I haven't checked Chancellor Marcello's permission for this on the 7th, Monday. The reason is many things happening this week. Chancellor Marcello and myself, we are addressing Mayor's Summit in Florence on 8th. And we are going to request Governor Brown to take this message to COP23. And Maria has several summits in COP23. So we would like to post it. And what I suggest is that by now, this is all the comments you made. And I want to advise my friends, you complain anything about the words here, I'm going to go back to the emails. I got 150 emails classified. I said, you said this, put here. But what I didn't tell you in this declaration is that after we finish this, the one all of you worked hard on, particularly Andy Haynes, this part we added. What follows is a summary of the air pollution and climate change problem as described in the last IPCC report published in 2013, and the new data that were published since 2013, including several reports of the Lancet Commission and WHO, and the data presented. Remember, Jeff Sachs said, don't go with the whole old message. Talk about what has developed. So that's what it's trying to do. So the document which we all circulated is become this background document, okay? So it says summary of data presented at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, blah, 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 and everything you wrote is here, okay? And so what I would like to request is the following. Andy Haynes and Joost Lelyveld take care of the accuracy of everything we say in the air pollution. If somebody complains, I'm going to blame both of you. But having said that, Sir Andy Haynes has been an enormous help in planning this meeting. So, and Jos has this. So is that okay, Jos? But you have to work tomorrow, because it has to come to me by Sunday afternoon, then I'll work in the night. Andy, is that okay with you? Thank you. I think as far as the climate change effects, I have the top expert on the planet on this, John Schellenhuber, and he and I work to fix it. But if you have any problem with it, send it to me. I think I want to leave it there. You know, our entire thing is here, so please don't get upset that it didn't work its way in the declaration. The background knowledge on which this depends on is there in toto. I added few things. What I wanted to tell you is that since it's a science academy, we can't come with these declarations without citations. What did it base on? So we have on the last several references. By all means, Howard, you were concerned that we are not citing authority. Please send it to us, okay? So, and also, I would like to include one reference from your own work so they can put it there, okay? So, as I said, we don't have too much time for comments. Marcelo. Oh, and now I'm worried. Go ahead, Brown, go ahead.
I don't like to be a nitpicker, but in your last point here about promoting an alliance among scientists, et cetera, which can have a transformational impact on the needed societal transformation.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit redundant.
Oh.
Do you want to have a transformational impact on transformation?
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I think you need to tighten that up.
I have a comment on that. I'm going to wait till on this. This is why I enjoy working with Governor Brown. Yeah, yeah.
We are very habituated at discussion of the final statement, but the best solution is if you want to make comments, please send and write in text about the things.
Yeah.
And if you want to add someone, please add you the sentence that you want that we add, because in the contract it's very complicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. So I think, so we are not discussing comments now.
Some comment, but in the end we need the text, right?
Right. Yes. So I would say we need to move on. The lunch is waiting. I'm going to allow for 3 comments. Please make it major. If it's minor, email it to me, I'll do it. So, please.
I'm totally fine with the document. I just never say, talk about the polluter in a way that suggests that we're not the polluters.
Right.
When you say make the polluter pay, I don't want anyone to have the sense that as they drive around or they fly across the country that they're not the polluter. They should be paying.
Absolutely. So is there some particular change? You can send it to us?
I'll send it to you, but I don't want to let that go by. I'm sorry I didn't get the message to get to you earlier.
No, that's a fantastic message. Okay, Dan.
I want to reflect what I thought was this powerful last session. And one thing that didn't appear here, I don't have any objection to the technical parts, but something of the form of climate change impacts us all and requires dialogue and trust, which can lead to fellowship and shared outcomes. And I think we're missing some version of what we heard in the last session, and this is just one quickly done version of that.
Email that to me, Dan. I think that statement is there, not in that very many words, so, but do send it to me. Howard? No comments? Yes.
I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for amazing work done so quickly. But one thing that I want to stress is I think that we're leaving something on the table, and that is that we are asking people to be more emotionally involved in what's happening, and we find that they want to avoid feeling vulnerable. I think it's really important for us to stress the emotional impact of what we are hearing every day and what our kids are hearing is something that we want to address very categorically. So I'll send, with your permission, a bullet.
So Maria has the last, okay, no, I'll come to you. Maria.
I just sent a message to Dr. Tedros. He will be tweeting the declaration, and he offered to talk about that tomorrow in Milano at the G7 Ministerial.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm sorry, Melissa, I have to cut it, but go ahead.
It's not coming. Oh, here it goes. It's a simple suggestion, just to design a way to use all these papers so that they can be made available to people who have not participated here. So I'm not sure if through the website of the Academy or somewhere. I think it would be nice just to put that in a publication.
It's not going to be possible.
A web-based publication.
A copy, sorry, because it was in the last moment that we had the last version, sorry.
No, we'll give a link to that. So I have to close it now. There's one last item I want to mention, then I'm going to turn over the podium to Chancellor Marcello, then our president, to share their view. On the book, the Academy always brings out a book with some beautiful cover, and it's done very well. And you can access these books on the website. I'd like to tell you the process I want to go through. I think this book, if your chapters are written properly, could be used as a textbook because it's a new message we are giving. So I would like to plan this. Many of you have not turned in your papers. I harassed my San Diego colleagues and they all popped up. So please send your papers at the latest by December 15th. It's 1 month from now. And those of you who have submitted, feel free to revise it based on what you heard. And the book front is going to be, the first page would be a message from Pope Francis, who I consider to be the moral leader of the world. And I'd like to put the next page from Governor Brown, his speech today. It's the only time I have to give some work to my boss. So maybe one of your colleagues have typed it, and you feel comfortable, Governor Brown, to edit it as you feel like. And the reason I would like you to give that is I think of you as the wise leader of the world in the way you defined wisdom. And then the chapters will follow. I'm going to have the technical chapters reviewed. So each of you will know, one of you will be reviewing your colleague's paper. Your colleague wouldn't know who reviewed it, so you can be blunt and ruthless in the comments. It has to meet, this is a fantastic opportunity we have, it has to meet the standards of, is it teachable? And then we may even go to a publisher like Cambridge University Press, or I like University of California Press, whatever, to see if they'd be interested in publishing the book. So please give some time to writing the book. Chancellor Marcello, thank you.
I want to thank all of you and also the translator. But I want to say another thing about religion. One moment. We are in our meetings here in the Academy, especially with the Anglicans, but not only. We have a meeting with the Pope and other religious leaders. The general idea is this. It's not easy to have the same idea of God, because God is a great mystery, and each of one can put the accentuation in some attributes or another, etc. But it's clear that all of us can have the same attitude, more act, to defend the human dignity, freedom, the peace, and especially the question of climate change. Yeah. So in this, we need to be together to act. It's more easy this to pray together anyway. Thank you. President.
Colleagues, friends and guests, this Academy has goals, and among these goals are those stating that we are here to make sure that science benefits the largest number of people and peoples, communities, that means. We are here to foster interaction between science and reason and to facilitate dialogue between spiritual and religious communities and the sciences. And I think we did very well on that score just today. And special thanks from me to the religious leaders who spoke to us today. I believe we also implicitly gave voice to the poorest. We had several presentations which brought into this room the terrible situation of the millions of poor women who cook and smoke and die by the hundreds of thousands prematurely because of bad air and not able to breathe fresh air. We also gave voice to nature implicitly under attack. But most importantly for this conference, we addressed the disease consequences of climate change in new ways with excellent expertise. We respect in this academy different values rooted in morale, but we don't respect in this academy neglect of evidence of science. That's our foundation, and that's why we can make a difference. Follow-up will happen, but it will only happen if all of you are part of the follow-up game. Let me thank, representing the whole crowd of guests here in the room and maybe on the video elsewhere, represented by you, Governor Brown, and your wife, Anne. It was an honor to have you here. Please be our ambassador of the messages here. And let me close by thanking Ram and Pata, who have pulled this conference off for us, and I ask you for a round of applause to them. The meeting is closed. Thank you, the meeting is closed.